Welcome to Crossroads. I'm your host, Joshua Phillip. Today we have with us Kevin Dayaratna with the Heritage Foundation. He's going to be talking about the Green New Deal. They did a cost analysis on it, and what a concept. I'm curious what your findings are.
Yeah, good to be with you, Josh. We've heard about concerns about global warming over the years, and I think the bottom line is we all want clean water, clean air, as well as a healthy environment. And I think most people would believe that the climate is changing, but the question is, to what degree, no pun intended, and with these policies, what will be the costs and what will be the benefits of these policies? So at the Heritage Foundation, we decided to look at this question, and we found some very, very interesting results.
So what did you find? I'm curious.
So basically, Ms. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came to Congress with a Green New Deal on her agenda, which is the goal of the policy is to essentially eliminate CO2 emissions and greenhouse gas emissions by the end of the century. So we decided to score this using the Heritage Energy model, which is the same model that the Department of Energy uses. And the first thing we found was that her policy, the Green New Deal, literally crashes this government model. The model absolutely cannot handle the level of the CO2 emissions reductions that these advocates of this policy are seeking. So what we ended up doing was we rescored the bill, or the policy, to the best that the model could handle, and we found that the economic impacts were quite devastating. There were significant economic costs and essentially no environmental benefit whatsoever.
So no environmental benefit.
Yeah, so what we found was that by 2040, over the next 20 years, there would be over $15 trillion in lost GDP, amounting to $165,000 in lost income for a family of four. Over 30% increase in household electricity expenditures, and an average of 1 million jobs lost a year, which is pretty devastating. And we also looked at the climate impact using, again, another government model, the MAGIC model with 2 C's, the model for the assessment of greenhouse gas-induced climate change. This is, again, another government model, and what we found is that the policy would come with less than 0.2 degrees Celsius temperature mitigation and less than 2 centimeters of sea level rise reduction, which is literally about that much, Josh. So the Green New Deal would come with significant economic costs and essentially no environmental benefit whatsoever.
Interesting. So tell us about the cost and how you kind of analyze the cost for this.
So what happened was we took this government model. This is the Heritage Energy model, which is identical. It's a clone of the Department of Energy's National Energy Modeling System. And we coded into the model a carbon tax to achieve the CO2 reductions that the Green New Deal is seeking, as well as regulations on manufacturing and mandates on renewables, because this is really what the goal of these policymakers is. And as a result of the simulation, what you end up getting is standard macroeconomic indicators such as GDP, employment, and so forth. So we compare that to the current trajectory that we are on. And again, you could see that the impact is quite devastating.
So in other words, not only would the Green New Deal not reduce carbon emissions, it would make energy, maybe a tiny bit, but it would mostly make the situation worse. It would cost an incredible amount of money for every American citizen and family, and it would pretty much collapse our entire system of managing the environment.
Well, Josh, so again, the carbon dioxide emissions, may occur, but the question is, and this is what we advise policymakers in our work. This paper, by the way, was published at the Heritage Foundation, and you guys, we encourage your viewers to check it out. The carbon dioxide reductions would be accompanied by negligible changes in the climate itself. So in the paper, what we did was we advised policymakers to go a step further beyond just talking about GHG reductions, carbon dioxide reductions, and translate that into climate impacts. The climate impact would be quite negligible, and again, the economic impacts would be quite significant all across America.
Great. Now, and I guess last point, you mentioned, we were discussing a bit off camera, that costs of carbon emissions, right? The cost of carbon actually is negative. Is this accurate?
Well, so the social cost of carbon, this is what we were talking about off camera, is a class of models used by the federal government. It's been used in the past by the federal government, I should say, to quantify the economic impact of carbon dioxide emissions. These models were available from the federal government. They come from academia. So at the Heritage Foundation Center for Data Analysis, we took these models in-house and we played with the assumptions. And basically we found that the federal government had basically manipulated the social cost of carbon to get an artificially high number to justify their regulatory agenda. And by tweaking the assumptions, tweaking them in very reasonable ways, we noticed that you can manipulate these models to get pretty much any result you want. And under some very reasonable assumptions, and this is what I was alluding to earlier, this social cost of carbon can be negative. And the implications of that are quite profound.
What are the implications?
Well, when people think about social cost of carbons, it's used generally as a proxy for a carbon tax to mitigate the so-called damages associated with carbon dioxide emissions. But the interesting thing is when this social cost of carbon becomes negative, it signifies that CO2 emissions are a net benefit to society. So the policy implication there is that one shouldn't be taxing carbon dioxide emissions, but should be subsidizing it instead. Now, we of course don't take the position that one should tax or subsidize CO2 emissions, but it's quite disturbing that these models can be used by policymakers to get pretty much any result that you want.
And the fact that they manipulated the numbers to say something different.
Exactly. Basically what happened is the previous administration, the Obama administration, had beefed up the social cost of carbon to justify its regulatory agenda. And I've spoken this at length in talks in the past and in congressional testimony. It is very, very dangerous to put these models in the hands of policymakers.
Great. So where can people find your research?
So our research is available, Josh, online at www.heritage.org. We encourage your viewers to check out our research. And I also on Twitter. My Twitter handle is KDD0211, and I post much of my research on Twitter. But yeah, we encourage your viewers to check out our work.
Wonderful. Great having you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Great. Everyone, please remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.